Yes, it is being recorded. Okay, so how are you, Carmen and Nina? Because you were unable to attend last time. Have you been able to catch up, look at the video or not, maybe?
Yeah, I've seen parts of the video. That's what I usually do, just to get the global main thing. So yeah, that was clear. Not really, not many questions.
Okay, so
There,
you doubled the speed, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. What about you, Nina?
Well, I wasn't able to watch the recording. Super busy with all the deadlines. I'm sure everybody is, and I tried to fit it in, but
yeah, but
it didn't work.
That's not a problem. That's why we have it on video. You can always watch it afterwards.
I plan on watching it once, like, I get a little bit more time and air.
Yes, we're entering in ITEPS. We're entering a super busy time of the year, and especially for all of you, that is the case. So, also welcome to you, Nastaran and Bernard, and let's just get started.
Thank you. Before we start, may I say something?
Yes.
I'm joining with my phone because the internet where I'm now is not working. That's why if I need to write something, maybe some of you do that for me, I will appreciate.
Okay, no worries, and thanks for sharing. Speaking about sharing, can you currently see my screen? Screen sharing has failed to start. It says, please try again. Okay. Let me see if I can try it again. Oh, it's a good start. It doesn't work. Let me see.
It should work for you, Marcel, because you're yeah, it works. No,
it does?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So, because no one can do it, even I can't do it now.
Okay, but it still works. You can see the screen, right? Okay, then thanks, Anastasia, for helping me there. Well, as you see on screen, we are going to take a slightly different turn today, and we're going to work around issues of outdoor learning, more specifically geocaching and philosophy for children. And this is not strictly something that would fit into a philosophy course. I think you could also make use of geocaching basically in any kind of outdoor learning. And I tried to Google this, and this combination of geocaching and philosophy for children does not currently seem to exist. At least I have not been able to find any entries on this on the internet. Let's see if we can get this this thing kicked off. And I'd like to hear your opinions about the practicalities and the do's and don'ts of it later on throughout this session. As you can see on the title screen, I've written down a smart combination, patting myself on the shoulder there. A smart combination of treasure hunting and looking for a philosophical question. And actually, if you look at it metaphorically, my idea about this is that philosophy is all about the chasing of the truth, so to speak. So that in a playful way, trying to find out what the truth is made of. And one could argue that going for a geocache or going on a treasure hunt, a digital treasure hunt, because that is what geocaching is basically the same. The point is that most geocaches, and we will look into what geocaching itself is more deeply later on, most geocaches are just out there for fun and sometimes for educational purposes, but to my current knowledge, they have never been used for philosophical inquiry. And that is the niche that I'm trying to explore in this session today. I have sent you a couple of weeks ago already, but maybe this has escaped you. Certainly not Nastaran, because she's been doing it. I know because I've seen that on the Flipgrid video. But I don't know whether Bernard and Carmen and Nina, you have received that message, and whether you have also done it recently. Have you tried it out?
Yeah, I did try it out. I just didn't make a video of it. That completely just escaped my my mind. But I did try it out. It was quite difficult. because I'm in Germany right now, so the geocaches were all in German, and I'm not very fluent in reading German. So sometimes I was at the spot where it said it was, but then they had clues hidden, but I wasn't able to find them. And the ones who already did it by activity, that you can see, okay, where did I find it? But it was all in German. So I was able to find one, but I felt a bit, I failed the others to find it, but at least one.
Thanks for sharing, and thanks for trying out. So that had more to do with your linguistic abilities than your searching abilities, so to speak. Yeah. What about you, Bernard? Did you have the chance to try it out? Because you're coming from very busy times as well.
Yes, but actually this morning, after handing in the thesis, I took some time out to practice with geocaching, and it was a lot of fun. And I managed to find one as well, out of 3, because the first 2 attempts were kind of 50% attempts, I'd say. But that was also due to me not knowing that you actually have to search for something once you're on the location. I figured like, oh, so there's some coordinates, you go there, and then there's probably something out there which you can easily see. And then my 3rd attempt was actually geocaching someone's backyard, and that like an 80-year-old lady, and she was very physically and mentally fit, I'd say. And she's like, oh, the first time, huh? Yeah, but it's not that easy. It's not that easy. You gotta look. And then I searched in her backyard and found actually the geocache. So, yeah, and it was hidden, pretty well, I'd say. But it was a lot of fun because I got a lot of joy out of finding the what do you call it? The cache.
Yeah, the cache. Yeah. So that's quite a remarkable story, by the way, to find it in someone's backyard. It's not a very common thing to do. On the other hand, people do hide geocaches in the weirdest places. Actually, sometimes you have to climb trees, or you have to dig underwater, even roll away a big rock when you're in a rocky environment, for instance. Or in this case, be in someone's garden and then pleasantly surprise the owner of the house to tell her, in this case, that you're looking for a geocache. But indeed, you're absolutely right. The first thing that you have to acknowledge if you start with this phenomenon of geocaching is that you have to actually search for an object that is hidden. That is the most common format of geocaches. There's also virtual geocaches, but we will talk about that later. But the most common format is indeed that you have to look for a container which is hidden somewhere. And that can be a large container or a small container. But we haven't heard Nina yet. And then we go to Nastran.
I actually also uploaded a little video yesterday about my experience.
I checked yesterday morning, so
I did it yesterday evening. But I enjoyed it very much. I was even texting with Carmen while I was doing it because I couldn't find it, and it was very early in the morning, and it was very, very frustrating. But it was so much fun. I went to like some sort of playground. And actually, which is really fun, is in the description of it, they explained that they placed this geocache during the online learning period we had here in the Netherlands because they wanted to be to get the kids excited to go outside again in the form of little breaks. So that's why they made it. They created their own cache in the play area nearby, so that during their morning walks or afternoon walks, they could go with a purpose. So that was really fun. And while searching for it, it was it was hidden in a very special place. There was like a fence and the clue, because I was looking for like 15 minutes already and I couldn't find it. And the clue was...
You think that's long? You think 15 minutes is long? It's not.
No, but yeah. It felt long.
Yeah.
And then the clue was, in Dutch it said gehackt, so like it was a clear clue towards the fence.
Yeah.
And then I start looking there again for another 15 minutes, and then you feel so stupid just walking along a fence, looking everywhere, not being able to find it. And then I saw one of these little caps on top of one of the poles. I was like, it must be there. So I took it off, but nothing was there. And I was like, well, I was about to give up, but then again, I couldn't give up because I had already been looking for like half an hour, and I was like, I have to find it.
Yes, you want to find it.
And then I saw there was a second cap, and then I walked near it, and there was this little invisible string tied to the like part of fence next to it, and then I took it off, and then I pulled it out, and finally it was there.
Yeah, you found
So
it.
that was a roller coaster of emotion, because what I felt when I found it, I was so happy.
Yes. Okay, hang on to this kind of energy, because we might as well read it later on. We go to, and thanks for sharing. Now we go to Nastaran. Nastaran, your experience? You already did it a month ago or so?
Yeah, a month ago I did it. I did two times. For the first time, I was inside the city, close to my house.
Yes.
It was interesting, but when it was close to house, but it was a little bit difficult because some of them were not really in a good place. Some were too close to some house, and I really didn't want to go too close because some people are a little bit intensive, or they don't like that sensitive to go to close their house. And to be honest, I feel not really good.
Yeah.
And then for the second time, I decided to go outside. And what Lina said, that 15 minutes, 20 minutes, I would say that I have left my home around 11 in the morning, and I back around 7 in the afternoon, in the evening.
Wow, that's how long it took you to find.
I just walked and I went outside the Zoole.
Yeah.
And I ended up with a golf field, and it was somewhere there, and yeah, it was fun, and it was and difficult. But the things I didn't like that was close to some house in the city. That was the part that I didn't like of that.
No, too close to people's property, and that.
Because and if you are not, they become a little bit sensitive. If not all of the people, some people, if they see you as a foreigner and go and searching around their house, that's why it was a bit. That's why I felt not really good, to be honest, in the city.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, 4 very different experiences of having done the geocaching. So the linguistic part, the fact that you couldn't find it, Nina. Being in the backyard of someone, burnout, and also Nastaran's experience of feeling a little bit uncomfortable when you're getting too close to a personal domain of people, and all these elements come together in geocaching. But I think one of the common denominators in your stories is that at least you have. I saw some smiles on your faces, right? So it was fun to do. It was not everyday experience, so to speak. Did you have any kind of experience with geocaching, or had you ever heard about this before?
I had heard about it before. My primary teacher I believe she still is very. I believe she spent her weekends geocaching.
Oh.
So and she was always very excited about that, but somehow never transferred to me actually trying it, because I never did it before. But it is.
It's kind of a global subculture, actually. So there are people who are really, really very much into it. My wife and I were on holidays a month or so ago, and we ran into people who had been tracing, mind you, 80 geocaches on one day. I would argue that's a little bit much. And also, what do you see of the rest of the environment? So I would recommend to keep it a little bit proportionate, and let's go into that educational link as well, because of course we're doing this course about philosophy for children, and I'd like to bridge geocaching to philosophy. But first and foremost, thank you for trying it out, and at least you now have an idea of what it feels like to be doing this. And maybe you also can put yourselves in the shoes later on of learners, and you may be accompanying learners in your school in a philosophical geocache. So that's why I thought it was good to at least engage you in the endeavor of trying to find one first before we start to talk about it. unfortunately, we all have to do this in front of a screen. So, of course, I would have preferred to take you outside and to actually do a philosophical geocache with you. Well, second best is to do a workshop on what philosophy and geocaching could look like, and see if we can if we can get you to trying it out and to experiment with this in education in any shape or form, be it in the last phase of your teaching practice or maybe later on if you have a class of your own. Right, I found an article from MIT International School in Amsterdam, which I would like you to read. It's very brief. It's I think it reads in 2 or 3 minutes. So I'd like you to read this, and I'm going to open it, and I'm going to share the link with you in the chat. And I have a few questions about the article right after this. So please let me share this with you in the chat. Where is the chat? Let me see. I think I have to stop sharing, or no, here's the chat. So here it comes. So what I would like you to do is to have a read for a couple of minutes, and then I have 5 questions for you about it. Go ahead. Maybe you can give me a sign when you've read it, just say it. Read it? Fernand is still reading, Amsterdam as well. Okay, Bernard, what about you? Okay, right. Okay, let me go back to the, do you just see the slides again? You do? Okay. So, of course, this is just an article about outdoor learning and play, and in the eyes of people from an international school in Amstelveen, as you have seen. What is actually the gist of what they say, Carmen, if I may ask you first?
The specific school, right? The forest school that you're talking about now. Yeah, is that well, their main priority or thing is that they have outdoor education and that they're outside, and that being outside provides a whole different set of learning opportunities and learning outcomes that if you were to teach inside or inside a classroom, it wouldn't occur. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good start, thank you. Anything to add there? Is there anything else that you've read that they also bring up?
I think it's also nice to add the thing that they talk about the IB curriculum, that they see that they can see the outside playground as like an extended classroom in which the IB learner goals, I don't know how to call them, can also be achieved. I thought that was very interesting too. Yeah, an interesting remark.
Yeah, okay, so it's part of the IB curriculum, or it is at least an opportunity to embed outdoor learning in any shape or form in the IB curriculum. So that makes the practical link, I think, between one of the major international curricula and outdoor learning visible, not necessarily via geocaching, of course, but outdoor learning in general. Would you have any theoretical connections? Do you see any theoretical links from what you have learned so far within items, or maybe things that you have come across in teaching practice, where you also see a theoretical connection between outdoor learning, being outside?
Maybe a pedagogical approach, because it also talk about that it helps them to release, to become fearless and working with nature. And I think also it says that maybe working with collaboration and nature, and also the something for the, what was that? For the global pandemic, and like that they say that like the caring the nature and
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a very important link which you mentioned there. So the global commitment, or in any shape or form, the connection between humans and nature, is something that is very often stressed, of course, in many forms of education. Also, if you look at the concept of holistic education, I think potentially some of you have come across in the elective inclusive education. So looking at learning in a holistic way should include, in any shape or form, one could argue, going outside with children and learning outside. And remarkably, and please jump in if you want to add something, remarkably, many schools still look upon education as something that happens within the four walls, including items, by the way, within the four walls of the institution. So it is not a natural thing for schools to look outside the window and to take your learners outside to actually do the learning. Very often it takes the shape of an excursion into something, rather than that the learning is actually taking place outside. So that could be another link that you can make here. And also you can look at various scholars who have emphasized the importance of being outside and experiencing, for instance, what it means to be in nature. John Dewey is an important one over here, coming from my background here. But maybe you can think of other potential links. I don't want to take this too far for now, because it is purely meant to make you see that there are all kinds of connections that you can make between education and outdoor learning. Also, you could argue from a very pragmatic point of view as a teacher, having say 25 children in your classroom, that you see potentially all kinds of objections. So can we hear a few, which can potentially be objections to taking your class outside? Yes, Bernard.
Well, there's simply too much freedom, and the students might not be responsible enough to deal with that freedom.
Yeah, you lose them practically. That could be the case. And metaphorically speaking, lose them so they could just play and do all kinds of things, and you don't have any overview of what they do at all whatsoever. And you could say that there's a very thin line between play and learning. At the moment, especially with the higher grades, when they're only playing, you could argue that you lose education time. But you can also physically lose them, of course, and potentially dangerous situations can occur if you're not paying attention well. For instance, taking your class into a city, a big city, can potentially be very dangerous, of course. And you must have heard this before, that international schools sometimes apply policies of so-called risk assessment before children are allowed to be taken outside. So you have to do a risk assessment first with your class, for your class, that is, before you can even engage in outside or outdoor learning. Any other objections? Again, I don't want to go into this for too much time, but just maybe as an orientation. Anything else? Yes, Bernard?
Also, teacher backgrounds. Teachers might say that they do not have the knowledge or skills to teach students outside, and they're too comfortable teaching inside. No one has ever taught them how to teach outside. I can easily imagine that a teacher would feel a bit of fear, be a bit scared. It's the unknown. So
the unknown and lacking repertoire, not knowing how to organize the learning, for instance, that can be a reason not to even begin with it. And of course, you can think of many more objections, as well as with many more potential advantages of outdoor learning. So there's pros and cons to this, and I'm certainly not presenting this as the solution for learning or so, but just as another option, and we will then slowly get to geocaching. Then, of course, you can also make the difference or the distinction between structured and unstructured outdoor learning. So you can just organize a very meticulously prepared excursion with children into a particular area, a certain area, and organize the learning over there, meaning that the children will hardly have any room to maneuver outside of the exercises that you have thought of. And the other extreme could be, of course, that you take your learners to any situation outside and you just expect that they will start learning in a very unstructured manner, and everything in between. So you can think of this whole idea or concept of outdoor learning in many different ways, I think, between these two poles of structured or unstructured learning. I think that if we situate geocaching on that spectrum of structured and unstructured learning, you could say that it is a semi-structured form of learning, especially if you want to connect it to philosophy for children. Because if you want to create a philosophical geocache, then of course the form and the format is already predetermined. You would have to organize GPS devices or telephones with an app that is installed in there, and you would already have to predetermine a place where your learners would have to go to, like you have done your own search. But if you are connecting this to philosophizing and philosophy and asking philosophical questions, that inherently, of course, can be very open tasks and open things to consider. So then you would have a semi-structured way, structured in a way that you have a fixed learning methodology, being geocaching, and open, of course, is then the task itself. And we will get to the task in the later slides. Another thing that I would like to show you is that it is quite common in international schools to engage learners in outside learning. I don't know whether it would make sense now to have a look at this video, but I've embedded a video in this slide, which has the title Paris as a Classroom, which comes from the International School of Paris, which I happen to have the pleasure to visit 2 or 3 times. So I know the school quite well. And their slogan is educating for complexity. That is their vision and mission underpinning their education. And they have the luxury that they're in the middle of Paris. The school is situated in one of the wealthiest suburbs, not suburbs, but quarters of Paris. And they have the opportunity to have Paris on their doorstep. And of course, it would be very stupid not to make use of that as a school. So they also do this. They make use of Paris as a classroom, and they engage in very structured trips, field trips, in which they take their learners, for instance, to the Paris sewage system, in which they explain how the recycling and the reuse of water is of extreme importance in the city. So it's a nice video that you can watch later on if you would be interested in this. And obviously, the internet is filled with clips like this of international schools that demonstrate either for PR purposes or to inform the parents or as a representation of the learning by the learners. They have all kinds of movies and clips that you can find on YouTube, in which they show how they are making use of the outside world to learn and to engage their learners into learning. Now, you've already experienced geocaching. You see a few photos of the forest near to my house, where there's some prehistoric monolithical graves that have indeed geocaches in their vicinity. And they, to my surprise, all these geocaches are just simple geocaches to be found, and they do not contain any questions about the natural environment. So when I went around in my own surroundings, I came to the conclusion that yes, there is a very rich natural historical environment that I'm living really close by. But apparently those geocachers or the makers of those geocaches have not made any connections to that environment. And that is precisely what I would like to get you interested in, to play with the idea a little bit, to toy with the idea a little bit, and to later on also create in teams of two a philosophical geocache, so that others can benefit from it, but also we can try it out later on. So that is actually the task that is coming out of this session. And I will lead you through a few steps on how you should do that. These are the three steps that you've already taken. So you've already installed an app on your mobile phone. Was there any of these apps that I mentioned over here that was your favorite? I'm using the app simply called Geocaching myself, but it's a paid version. So is there any of those?
Oh, I use the unpaid version of that, and it works fine.
You have an unpaid version of that. Yeah. Yeah,
just a geocaching app.
Then you have a limited amount of caches that are being displayed. If you have a paid version, I think it is 30 euros a year. Well, it should be your hobby to purchase a paid version, of course. But then you would have a tenfold or a 20-fold of the number of geocaches available in your screen, and you can use it worldwide. So you can also take it with you on holiday, for instance, if you're interested. And if you have this little niece or a little nephew that is interested, I can recommend it on personal title. We've tried it out with one of my little nephews, then 5 or 6 years old, and he was really running through the woods and really engaged to try and find this geocache. So kids really seem to like this. You've already been looking for 3 geocaches. Have you also been able to log them? Do you understand the principle of logging a geocache, or have you just found it and did you return home? Carmen?
No, I did write on a piece of paper. I think that's what you mean, right? That you write on the piece of paper that's in the cache,
yes,
the date and name.
That's part of what I mean, because the idea of geocaching is that you log them on site. So very often in these caches, there's this little notebook in which you can just write your initials and the date, for instance, and then you put the little logbook back into the cache. But it's also a common practice to go to the website, for instance, in this case, geocaching.com, find the GPS coordinates of that particular cache that you have just found, and write a little reference under the cache, which has been also identified on the internet over there, so that the originator of the cache, the maker of the cache, can see that it has been found and that you have enjoyed the search, or that you have sometimes also put back something into the cache. So the larger containers very often contain an object, very often a toy, for instance, a very tiny toy, such as a key ring or a pencil or something like that. And the idea is originally of geocaches is that you take something out of it and you put something back into it. And that is also supposed to be identified on that log. And
you mean also we should also, because the app that I upload, when I found it, I can't say that I found it, and I had to write some idea about what I found actually.
Yeah.
But that was not like that I need to put something there, because some of them were in top of the tree and one of them was underground, and it was there was no place to.
No. It depends on the type of cache, Nastran, that you find. That there's the basic ones. There's the so-called earth caches. There's the multi-cache. There's the puzzle cache. There's all kinds of variants there. It's almost like the virus, the coronavirus. There's all kinds of variants there, but it depends a little bit on the type of cache that you have found.
Okay.
And there's also an option in many of these apps to log the geocache that you found over there, to log it in the app itself, and you don't have to go to a computer and go to the internet. You can do it on site in the app itself. Well,
that's what I did in the
that's what
app
you did.
itself. Yeah.
Okay, well, we have already shared our impressions, so there's no need to do this. Also, you could go on geocaching with kids, and there's if you are looking for some readings, I'm not going to engage you in another reading right now, but if you look for some readings on geocaching with kids, then you would find remarkably many sources that speak about the possibility to not do this as an adult endeavor, but to engage children with it. Very often in the sphere of families, of course, parents and their children. So this is an example of an article where that's also being stated. And some schools also engage in educational geocaches, but as said, not many. And to my knowledge, no schools engage in philosophical geocaching, and that's of course precisely the turn that I would like to take with you in this workshop today. We're not going to read this article, but I do have a few questions about educational use of geocaching. Would you see any educational use beforehand? Would you see how you can integrate or embed geocaching in just any subjects before we go into philosophizing? So do you see any curricular connections or possibilities, or?
Yeah.
Maybe. Oh, sorry.
You go ahead.
Yes.
No,
yes,
go
yes.
ahead, Nina.
Well, what immediately came to mind is that during my teaching practice, we had a lesson about maps and your way to school. And I could easily see that extending into finding your way to like a geocache, for instance, to learn how to read a map or how to follow direction, or how to create more awareness for your environment, all these kinds of things.
And do you also have ideas on how you could do that? Because a geocache is just a container with that you walk to by looking at the GPS coordinates, and that's it. So it's in itself. You
could maybe print like a map and then first discuss like how do we know where to go, and look at the different streets you have to go to, and does anyone know where they are, and make like a plan beforehand on how to walk, and then actually go there and then find it.
Okay, so physical orientation or on paper, or making use of paper maps or things like that first, and then go over to virtual communication with a geocache. Is that a good idea?
What do you mean with the virtual?
Well, geocaching is basically also looking to find something on a map, but then the map is beneath your feet, right? So you're actually walking a particular distance, and one could argue that you could that you should start with this geospatial awareness that children have to develop first in order to understand that 100 meters away toward the east, for instance, you should walk that particular way, and they should understand it first, and then they can do it. But you might as well argue the other way around, right? And say, okay, we're going to experience something first, and then we're going to be learning the conceptual knowledge about it, namely what is the East and what is 100 meters, for instance. There's different ways of approaching this. And you've already mentioned mathematics. Any other, so thank you, any other links that either of you see there with potential learning or learning potential for geocaching, other than that it is just a hobby? Bernard?
Yeah, well, you could lead students past historical artifacts within your town or city.
Yeah.
Which makes your information a lot more vivid.
Absolutely, and of course you can never nail a geocache to a 16th century building, because then you're destroying heritage. And that is why it's also important to realize that, of course, you have to ask for permissions to install geocaches, especially if it is going to be physical geocaches. So you can't just bury a container anywhere and turn it into an educational tour. You have to do some research and see whether you can hide something or whether you can create something. But there is a solution for that. There's also virtual geocaches. So you can just identify a particular GPS coordinate that leads people to a specific site, a place in town where a particular building is or where a statue is, and there you can create an assignment, for instance. You had a question, Nina?
No, I had a comment actually, because one of more like a story. One of the other geocaches I did was specifically about like a festival here in Nijmegen called Fortarok. And there's a whole history behind that festival. And then within the cache, they had like this little booklet where they told the story of how it all came to life. So that made me think of Bernard's suggestion that you can, like, I learned something from that unexpectedly. Like I took it out, like, hey, there's a little book and you could flip it through and read about it. And it was just really cool. I'm like, oh, this is a great purpose, a great way to to, I don't know,
a way to convey a message or a way to inform an audience. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's basically the thing that I would like us to mine in this session to see whether we can make it useful for P4C. Mind you, we will get more philosophical later on in this session, but first the organizational thing I think is also important. Carmen, would you have any ideas for links to subjects or integrated projects or?
Yeah, I guess an integrated project that could basically apply to any subject is that it could be for if you're learning for a test or there's an upcoming test and you get the students get a sheet of paper with like questions or things that they need to learn, and the answers are hidden in the geocaches. So then they have to find the right answer, so the right geocache for that specific question, for example. It's a bit vague because it can be applied to like physics, it can be applied to mathematics, geography.
Yeah, wonderful. You just share the potential form with us, so you can not provide the answers, but let the children go on the hunt for answers, and the answers they will only find once they have found the geocache, for instance. So that then you turn it into kind of a treasure hunt. Yeah. Like that. Yeah. Indeed. Other ideas, or shall we go on? What I of course realized when I prepared this session for our philosophy course, and keeping in mind what you've already digested so far from Anastasia's wonderful contributions, is of course that if you want to organize something, a philosophical session or a philosophical quest or whatsoever, then you very often, as a teacher, as a very busy teacher, we all know that teachers are very busy and the job is very demanding, you could immediately run into all kinds of practical and organizational obstacles that you can, let's take question 2 and 3 at the same time, that can sometimes be difficult to solve. But can you see potential organizational obstacles of creating a geocaching tour with your class, for instance, and at the same time, can you think about solutions? So how could you potentially solve those obstacles? And think of a hypothetical class of 25 students, and then you have this idea of indeed creating a philosophical geocache afternoon, say, with your class. Let's take a group of learners between 8 and 10 years old, for instance, and you have 25 of these kids. What could potentially hinder you and hold you back in organizing it? Yes, Nastaran. At least I see your hand in front of the camera.
Yeah. Yeah, I would maybe child behavior.
Yeah.
Because there would be some behavior issues of some students, and maybe it hinder me. Or
yeah, just things like crowd control. How can you manage a group when you send them outside, or when they are going outside on this
yeah,
P4C cache? How can you manage them? Make sure that they don't misbehave. Yeah, important obstacle. Can you also think of a solution?
think of the solution, maybe some make some rules, specific rules, and maybe a little bit strict. And to manage it, especially with some students that I know, for example,
that are
probably they will, yeah.
Okay. Others? Thank you. Bernard?
Well, organizing the devices.
Yeah, of course. You need to have.
I honestly, that question popped in my head. I was like, whoa, so are you going to have 25 students with 25 devices, or are they going to be paired up? And if so, then is there going to be some kind of competition and some jealousy happening? And
you don't want
it's super exciting, of course. And then I can imagine it must be kind of a struggle if you have to share the device.
Yes. So how can you counter that? Could you counter it?
First of all, practice with the devices in your classroom or in your school's playground, so that kids have a thorough understanding of how to use a device. Yeah, and I guess also what and it links to what Nastaran said. Maybe you can do a practice round without the devices. Just go outside and explain what you would be doing, but then without the devices, so you can put more focus on child behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that like you have gotten an impression of what it means to geocache, they can have an impression, but then maybe not the real thing yet, but have an experience of what it means to actually go and find something, and then they find
not
it.
all at the same time. I think that might be a bit too much.
Yeah, depends also a little bit on, and this is a hypothetical example, of course, it depends a little bit on the type of learning that your learners are used to, and the level that you will have with them. Also the number of students, of course, in the class. And I said, well, let's take a hypothetical number of 25. So there's potentially an issue here, devices. How can that also, how can you try to counter that within your school team, for instance? Assuming that you will do this not just once, but maybe more often.
I don't fully understand the question, I think.
Okay. Well, maybe it's good and easier also keeping in mind what other things we still need to do in the session. That I'll just give you a few suggestions of what you could do here potentially to counter any practical or organizational obstacles. For instance, if you think the behavior aspect will be a problem, you can try to organize a session with parents in which you collaboratively prepare this. Very often parents are very willing to help out in the school and to accompany you on an educational trip or a learning trip. with their children if you give them a clear task. So collectively, you can think of dividing up groups, for instance, and having one parent guide 4 or 5 students per group on an afternoon session in which you will engage your learners in this geocaching adventure. So that could be one way forward. Another way forward could be is that you try to aim for some budget within the school. There's often ICT budget. And this next to mobile telephones, which you can use with this app, there's also the opportunity to have GPS devices. You know, people who like to hike often use a GPS device, which is just a single modus device. Actually, it can only read a GPS track, and you can have a map on it, but you can also install an app on it, for instance, a geocaching app, and that would potentially lead to a situation in which children are not tempted to go out on the internet or to use a telephone for YouTube or whatever. So you would already have a device that is purely aimed at geocaching and finding a GPS track, for instance. So if you could have a combination of those things, so an enthusiastic group of parents that would like to help you out, and some budget for the purchasing of, say, 5 or 6 of these GPS devices. They're not very cheap. You would have to convince your PYP or MYP coordinator, for instance, in your school, that you will work with this more often, and not just in a philosophy session, but maybe also in a geography class or in a math class. Then you would increase the potential success of your experience, rather than running into these frustrations right away. And then combining this, for instance, with trying things out on the schoolyard, trying things out maybe first with a fake container that you hide somewhere in the schoolyard, and then later on trying things out with a device or with a telephone, could potentially help you to overcome these hurdles. So you do really need to organize something before you actually can start with this. It's not just crisp and clear. It's not just like organizing a philosophical a classroom session in which you can just put a question on the board and start, or put a photograph on the board and start. So it is more complicated. But it can also be much more rewarding, because later on, as you will see, you can add on a lot of things onto this geocaching potentially that could make it into a very, very interesting philosophical journey. In order to create an actual container, a geocaching container, you can of course make something yourself, but there is quite a commercial community out there. And many international schools are rather wealthy, so they're very often capable of providing school teams with materials. There's a geocaching shop which you can visit, in which you can buy empty containers, stickers, these little notebooks that you may have seen in the geocaches, but also GPS trackers, all kinds of things that you can make use of to actually create a geocache. So you don't have to make everything yourself, but you could make things yourself. Some people really think it is good fun to create such geocaches yourself. What I would like you to do is to make a philosophical geocache in teams of 2. So and that is not something that you have to decide right now, but it is something that I would like you to talk about. So both Bernard and Carmen, for instance, could be a team, and then Nina and Nastran, or make other mixes, whatever suits you. And I have hidden some links in this presentation in this slide, which would help you to read up and to also take the steps that you have to go through to make and to also hide a geocache. So what I would like you to do as an outcome of this session is to actually make a philosophical geocache. We will go into the philosophical questions right after this. And also hide it as a geocache somewhere in the environment where you currently are. So I think 3 of you are currently in the Netherlands, is that correct? And Carmen is in Germany, is that correct? Or have you returned from Germany already? Okay, so you may have to do some research to find out whether you can hide a geocache somewhere in your surroundings. But basically, the only thing you have to do is think of an alias name to hide, so it should be a philosophical geocache. So I would like you to make a philosophical geocache about a philosophical question. I have a few example questions later on for you to have a look at what you can think of. I'd like you to think of an alias name to hide the philosophical geocache, because you always have to have a name. And I would also like you to think of either an object that you can hide in the cache, and that can be an object that you can ask a philosophical question about. But you can alternatively, if you think it is too difficult or too challenging, or if you think you don't want to spend any money on an object, a small object that you want to put in there, you can also think of a question. So just a mere question, and you can use a QR code as a generator for putting that question into the geocache, or you can just print it out very small as a question that people can get out of the cache that they have to give an answer to, and then log in the log of the geocaches that has been found. So give the answer to the philosophical question. That's basically the idea that I have come up with for the creation of this geocache. So those are the first two steps. So think of an alias name, think of an object, or think of a question and put it in the container. A few things can be done here. You can think creatively about the object. So you can simply ask a question about the object, but you can also insert a riddle or a puzzle. Think of the earlier sessions that Anastasia has done with you on this. You can also give the finder of the cache an assignment. So you can ask them to look around in their surroundings of the place where they have found the geocache, and ask them, if in case they have a telephone with them, to take a photo of a particular object and log that photo together with the log that you normally already do when you find a geocache. So basically you can make a combination between these things as well. So creativity is your only limitation here. The idea is then that you fill the container with either the trading object that you put in, so you can put in an object into the container and ask people to take it out and to put something else back in, or you can have a QR code, or just a question that you have come up with. And always in a geocache container, go a small logbook, depending on how big the container is. You can have very small, tiny strips of paper, or you can have a larger logbook. And normally there's also a pencil in it with which you can write your initials or the date of finding on the geocache. And then while you hide it, you must make sure that you capture the GPS coordinates. You can do that very easily when you have a telephone and you have Google Maps open. You press long on the place where you currently are, and make sure you have your GPS connection activated there. When you press long on Google Maps, then you will see the two number of figures appearing, which identify the coordinates of the GPS where you hide the container. That's very important, of course, because otherwise you can't even find it back yourself, let alone the people that you will later send out to find your geocache. So that is very important. And you should also upload those coordinates to the platform that you will use. And then last but not least, before you actually make it go live, you should try it out yourself. So you should take a cell phone, a mobile telephone, open your GPS app and see whether you have activated indeed your philosophical cache. And then move onto your cache and try to find it and see if the coordinates are correct are fitting for the place where you have hidden your geocache. That's important to do as a last check. So does it work? That's basically the idea that is behind this. So actually it's 3 steps. It's thinking of a name, a good philosophical geocaching name. It's the creation of a cache with an object or a question in it. And I go back to the last slide. And it is actually hiding the geocache, making sure that you capture the coordinates and that you store that in the app so that it can also be found, and try it out, make sure that it really works before you make it go live. That's basically the task that I give you. Are there any questions about the organizational side of the task. Okay. Then what you could do if you say, well, I think it is a little bit it's a little bit sad to just make a solo geocache. You can also make a multi-cache. You can make an earth cache, for instance, in which you find an interesting spot in somewhere in nature that tells you something about the geology of a particular spot, for instance, and combine that with a philosophical cache. You can also make a mystery cache in which you will send the searcher for your geocache through various stations, and you give them assignments. They have to solve a riddle, for instance, or they have to solve a mathematical problem. And once they give the answer to the log, then you will send them a next indication for where to go next. So you can make it as complicated as you want, but for this task, for within this philosophical course, I would advise you to keep it a little bit simple. But you can expand on this if you want. Yes, Nina.
Is this an assignment for next week?
No. It's way too soon.
Great, because that's good to hear.
You can take a couple of weeks, and also, well, I'm of course I would be very interested to see whether you can get it off the ground and running. But I can also fully understand that you would now first take it as an idea and say, okay, that's really a nice idea, but frankly, I have other things on my mind. Of course, there's no way. I'm doing this course together with Anastasia to inspire you with all the potential possibilities for philosophy, and I can completely understand if you say, well, this is really too much for me right now, but then we need to know that by the end of this session. I think it's good to make a decision about this, but this is how I initially thought of it. Yeah,
I really like the activity, but it's just that thinking of having to do this now causes me stress already, thinking about all the deadlines.
That's not the way I want you to go. No.
Yeah, because I really, really like the activity, so I would really want to do it, but it's just that like the next 2 weeks will be.
Okay, then it's good that you mentioned it, because I really don't want to drive up stress levels. That's not my intention at all whatsoever. It's already remarkable that you are capable of following this course next to your graduation process. Of course, I do realize that very much. Is that the general feeling? Is that valid for more people?
Well, it was quite demanding when I was still on TP, but now that's finished. So
okay, that's okay. Let's see by the end of this session whether it is realistic or not. Blah 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 blah. I'm messing up my presentation. Sorry. I need to get rid of the chat function. Yes. Okay. Last but not least, have fun exploring. That is, of course, what I try to convey here. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I'm trying to inspire you and to see if this could potentially be something for you, either now or maybe later on when you have graduated and when you have done a year or 2 years with your class. Maybe it goes through your head at a given moment and you think, oh yeah, that's what we explored in P4C as well. So maybe I can try this out. It also depends very much on the school that you're into. If you're going to be employed at the Green School in Bali, I'm 100% sure that you can do this in the surroundings of that school. That school is very much oriented towards outdoor learning. If you have a more traditional, say, British international school, then most likely you will not get to doing this. So it also depends on what comes after this. Yes, Carmen.
If we do it, do we need to make a video and upload it to Flipgrid? Is that the thing that's called? Or is it just to show you pictures, so that will be fine? Or
yes, or you can just share next time, if you, or maybe the time after that, that you have created a geocache and share it with us so that we can try to find it, depending on where it is, of course. You make it in Kuala
Welcome
Lumpur,
to Germany.
If it's in Kuala Lumpur, I'm not going to run it. But I think you get my point. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
let's
definitely.
get back to this collectively at the end of the course and see if it's realistic to let you do this task right now or not. And if one or two of you say, well, basically it's not realistic, that actually the dice are already cast, I think. Yes, Nostrum.
because we are only 4, and if one of us, for example, are not able to do that, is it possible to do it as a 3 people together, or
Yeah, that would be fine with me.
has to be
So,
only 2?
yeah, so let enthusiasm rule. That's, I think, the idea. And I fully understand if you don't have time for this, but that is beyond this course, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get back to this at the end. Oh yes, I also had the idea, and again, this is something that you can read later on if you were to have time for this. Maybe think of Anastasia's practice so far. Maybe you would engage in any form of homeschooling related to philosophy for children at a given point. And also the integration of geocaching into a philosophy course, for instance, if you do that in the form of homeschooling and not necessarily in the form of teaching in an international school, there could also be possibilities. But there's also potential obstructions, maybe even dangers in philosophizing geocaching and homeschooling. Do you see any in that triangle? Do you see any potential danger? Because I don't want to cause any accidents there by being enthusiastic about this. So if you were to homeschool 2 or 3 kids and do a philosophy course remotely, for instance, with them, just as a private initiative, I know that many international teachers are privately tutoring, and you could at a given point engage into philosophy for children and do some philosophy course, just like Anastasia does, who knows. And then you would say, okay, maybe we can also do some geocaching. Do you see any possibilities? Do you see any objections there?
You mean online?
Yes, for instance, online.
Well, it might be more difficult to guide the process, especially the philosophical process.
Yes, yes. I think it is potentially very difficult to guide the process if you do it online. If you do it, say in post-COVID times, and you are actually working with children at home, and you would like to do some kind of geocaching trip or a philosophy geocaching trip, and you would be with them, of course, then you could carefully monitor what is happening. But if you would just throw this out and say, okay, maybe this is a good idea to do at a given point, then it is potentially dangerous. There is examples of people who have been looking for geocaches with their telephone in their hands, looking at the screen constantly and being run over by cars, for instance. So especially if you do that with children, then you need to be very careful in order to secure and safeguard the circumstances and making sure that children are not just getting lost in the woods despite the fact that they have a GPS device or that they have a telephone with them. But we will come back to this in the ethics session as well, which is the last one, the number 12, within 2 weeks. But there's also quite some enthusiasm in, for instance, the international education parent or something like that. I think the article comes from that magazine. There is interest, like with international teachers, also with parents from international school children. There is interest in the phenomenon of geocaching. They bring it up sometimes, very often as a hobby, but sometimes also as an educational opportunity. Okay, what I did, objects or places in your environment that could work philosophically. I've been talking quite a lot about the technical side of geocaching, the fact that you use a GPS device, that you need an app, that you are actually going into the environment, and that you're looking for an object. Nina has given a beautiful explanation of how difficult that sometimes can be. You have to roam around within an area of 5 meters trying to find something for 45 minutes, and you get frustrated and it's not there. The other side of the geocaching for philosophy and philosophizing with children is that it is actually sort of an art to look at the surroundings of where you are as an educator, and to look for the potential of the environment and what an environment could offer you to create a geocache about. And for instance, the way you can do that is to just roam around in your village or in your town, or go outside in nature and deliberately look for elements in the landscape, in the city, in the skyline of any village or town or city that could potentially be an object. And I tend to look upon nature or cities. Well, I'm not always doing that, of course, but when I'm looking for educational purposes, I try to look for objects that could potentially be an anchor to do either an educational tour about or to engage in a philosophical session, for instance. And just to share with you what I have done a couple of weeks ago is I just went out in the woods and I looked at objects that you could trace and find in the woods, and I thought of questions, philosophical questions that you could potentially ask, and these are a few of them. What is the purpose of a tree? If you're walking in the woods and you're looking at all those trees, and especially in springtime, all those leaves coming out, then you could ask yourself the question, and this is a fantastic philosophical question for children, I think, to ask yourself the question, what is actually the purpose of a tree? Is it there for an inherent purpose? Is there a tree-like purpose for any tree, or does the tree have a secondary purpose, for instance, in relation to us as humans? That is a potential question that you could ask. Can a forest get better? So do you have forests that are in a good shape or in a worse shape? Well, apparently yes. Last year I was in the Harz region in Germany, and you see a lot of deteriorated trees over there. So those forests are in quite a terrible shape. But what is actually the definition of a forest that is in a good shape, or in its best shape, maybe? And of course, you can also ask that philosophical question about any individual tree. So is there a situation in which the tree has reached its optimal condition, so to speak? Is that after 5 years, after 10 years? Is that when it is surrounded with all the same trees or very different trees, for instance? So those are questions that, this is the weird thing that my mind goes when I'm walking into the woods in a philosophical state of mind. Also, you can look at trees. I saw a dead tree on a trunk on the forest floor. And I asked myself the question, is that actually a worthless tree? And is the tree standing upright, which is alive with the branches and the leaves, is that a tree that is it actually a tree that is worth more than the dead tree on the forest floor? And what about the moment the tree gets transported into a wood factory? Would that be the moment when the tree transfers from a worthless tree into a worthwhile tree? And is it gaining any worth or value at that particular moment? All questions that you can ask if you are looking around you in the forest. I went on hiking with a friend, and we came we found ourselves on a road that literally ended in the middle of nowhere. It stopped. The road completely stopped. So the question that went through my mind at that moment was, does that make the road useless? Or is there the possibility that despite the fact that the road led to nowhere, there is still an inherent value in the road, namely the fact that it is a road? So must all roads actually lead to somewhere? Or can we also have roads that lead to nowhere? Intriguing philosophical question, huh? In the province where I live, where maybe some of you live, Drenthe, there's quite some Neolithical grave monuments from the so-called hunebedden. And when you look at those rocks, and knowing that these Neolithical graves were erected 5,000 years ago, approximately, you can ask yourself the question, and children can also ask themselves that question, or you can ask children that question when you take them outside on an outdoor learning trip. How does this rock connect me, or whatever you would find over there, to the past? And how does it connect me to the future? To what extent does it connect me? And what is actually my role in being in nature over there. And the last question, and these are just random questions that came up in me when I went for a stroll a couple of weeks ago when I prepared this geocaching presentation. We often use the expression of killing time. And Corona, of course, the Corona crisis is the ultimate situation in which a lot of us had to kill a lot of time. We had countless hours that were normally spent by commuting or talking to people in university buildings or school buildings. The little in-between time between lectures, whether you were a student or whether you're a teacher. The moment when you get home normally from work or from college, this was all washed away in the Corona crisis. So there was an awful lot of time to kill, and that's a running expression in English, of course. But is it actually possible to kill time? And what is actually the idea behind the fact that we seem to have time to do things and time to be things that are being done to us? And is actually time something that can be killed? So can you just go for a stroll in order to kill time? And if so, what does it then mean? Has time effectively been killed? Is time gone then at that particular moment? Or is time just something that exists in our mind? Well, I'll leave you with these questions for a little while, but not before you tell me which one you would like to see fitting into a geocache. Is there any of these questions that you say, yeah, that's a nice one that you could hide in a geocache somewhere in nature?
Yeah, I particularly like the must all roads lead to somewhere question.
And why is that?
think, well, partly because from my experience with the geocache, if I am not unable to find it, it feels like a waste of time, or but you can also then just see it as okay, you still embarked on a mission, and the road got you halfway there, and then it stopped, and appreciate the journey that you've taken so far, and just think about and appreciate, I guess, that like life experiences that did go well. And I could go into like a whole thing, but yeah, I like that one.
And then you're looking at the question more in a metaphorical way, right? Not
Yeah.
not in the literal sense, such as I coined it. Because my friend and I, we were really stuck at the end of the road. It stopped. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it could that could also be the case, definitely. But if I were to place it somewhere here in the city, you often like roads don't just stop, like they always have a so that wouldn't be applicable here. So
well, except for dead end streets, they do exist. There's even a sign for it, right?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
A traffic.
Sure.
There's a traffic sign for dead end streets. You know, the T-shaped sign.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking that if you are like a how do you call it, like a voetganger, a passenger? No,
a pedestrian.
Pedestrian, thank you. There is often, you can fit in between, like in a small alleyway, or you can cross the gardens, or there's always one path that you can take to get yourself out. But if you're in a car or something, then yeah, that will be the end of it, unless you turn around and.
Yeah. Okay, so you like that one?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay. Any others? So the question is, which of these questions that I came across in just an afternoon of hiking in the woods, which of these would you find fitting for a potential geocache that you would hide out in nature somewhere? And
I would choose two of them. Yeah, the things that Carmen said, yeah, that was my favorite one as well. But I would also choose, how does this rock connect me to the past and the future? Because I can connect it to some historic lesson about the rock, because I think a few years ago I watched Youth Journal for the children, and it was something I think that you mentioned actually, that was the rugs in the renter, where was that? Yeah, and they taught for children the history of this one.
Yeah.
And I think it would be interesting, and also the time, can time be killed? Because for someone maybe it's not interesting and for someone is interesting.
Mhm.
And I can make a discussion for that with this one, like a debate to the second one, the can time be killed?
Yeah. Others?
Yeah, the one question that stuck to me is the third one. Which tree is worth more, a living one or a dead one? And I looked outside and I saw a living tree, and I looked at my desk and I saw a dead tree.
Yeah.
And it immediately, I mean, it basically results in a debate between money and nature, economical purposes and environmental purposes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very small question that leads to a very large debate. Or
Now, okay, so thank you. Now, of course, just putting these questions into a geocache does not turn a geocaching journey into a philosophical session. So what you could do, and I think what you should do if you want to learn how to create a philosophical outdoor learning experience through geocaching, is to connect an activity next to asking that question. So what I would advise you to do if you at some point want to try this out, or want to try this out with learners, is to connect something to it. And what you could do, for instance, connect the idea to it that there is such a thing as the philosopher in the woods or the philosopher in the city, which occasionally posts new geocaches that learners can try to find, and they will find a philosophical question in it. But that should not be the end of it, of course. It should actually be the beginning of a philosophical journey. And there's many ways of how you can work with that. You can be the originator of that philosophical question yourself, for instance, as the teacher of the international school, which is placed within the vicinity of a natural reserve or a city. So you could then be the recipient of the answers to the philosophical question in the log. So you would have to go into the geocaching log every now and then to see which answers have been given to that particular geocache. And you could connect an email box to it, for instance. So you could be the philosopher in the woods, or you could be the philosopher in the city. And you could also be the philosopher behind the computer that answers or gives further input to the answers that have been given to this question. And you would generate kind of a philosophical discussion with a secret philosopher that is either hidden in the woods or hidden in the city or sits behind a computer somewhere, and nobody knows who it is. And actually, it is you yourself. So it can be an kind of an enigma for learners to find out more about this question. And I have this idea from the very famous book Sophie's World by Jostein Gaarder. You may have seen it, or you may have seen the movie, in which a young Norwegian girl, 14, 15 years old, the book was written, I think, 25 years ago, receives a video cassette in her physical mailbox at her house, in which a philosophical question is being asked. And she's been taken on a philosophical journey because every time another video cassette is being delivered at her doorstep. So you can use this idea to have a continuing thread of philosophical sessions happening. And the thing that the learners will have to do is to find the geocache with the question. And they can also bring it to class, of course. They can bring it to your class, and you can connect it with a philosophical session in which you will, in person, discuss the question with the learners. And each and every one gets the opportunity to bring a philosophical question to class, which they have found either in the woods or in the city. So that can be a combination of geocaching and P4C. At least in my mind, it can be. And again, it's really a new idea. I haven't really tried it out with learners yet. So you would be really the first to try this out if you would do this. Of course, it would be very interesting to see whether this would be an extra incentive for children to get curious about a question or to get curious about a particular topic. The moment you start to realize that it gets really artificial and that you're making things up to get a philosophical discussion started, then I think it's not worthwhile investing. But maybe you can try it out at some point to see whether it is yet another mode of delivery next to the specific things that Anastasia has already shared, next to, for instance, children's books, storytelling, conceptual art, and the ideas that she has shared last week with you. I think we're nearing the end. Oh, I have more questions. Oh, I forgot about that. Of course, I saw the Neolithical graves, and I was thinking about these poor people that have been buried there 5,000 years ago. Nobody knows who they are anymore. And within 100 years, 150 years, nobody will know who we are anymore. It is hard to imagine, but it's really true. So could there be a way to be remembered forever after we die? Can also be a question. And you can also slightly tilt that question into, should we be remembered forever after we die? It's a deep one for tonight with a glass of wine. Also, is living nature, a tree, for instance, stronger than dead nature? I saw a rock in the forest that was split, literally split by a tree that grew through it, right through the rock. So is dead nature maybe not so strong as we often think it is, and is living nature maybe even stronger? And then I saw a very carefully constructed path of all these little cobblestones that you find so much in Drenthe over here. A very clearly outlined path. And that led me to the last question, are humans the most intelligent species on the planet? Because we apparently are capable of making use of all kinds of tools to construct our own world. We have a complete world erected next to the natural world, which we call culture. Does that mean that we are the most intelligent species on the planet? Question mark. So I had some more questions here. I think there's no time to go over these, but which of these four do you like best? I haven't heard you yet. I believe Nina.
Which of the questions I like best? You
Yeah.
mean, or yeah. I think they're all interesting, but if I would have to pick one, I think I would go with should we be remembered forever?
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, that's just really interesting question.
Do you think it is suitable for children, or do you think it is too heavy for children?
No, I think it's suitable for children.
Mm-hmm.
I think they could come up with some very interesting answers there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm leaving it here for the moment. I want to leave you with this. These are very popular currently, aren't they? You find them everywhere, also in the forest, and kids really love them. So if you say, well, this is too tech savvy for me, and all that GPS thing and things like that, you can also, with a very thin fine liner, write a philosophical question on a stone and hide it somewhere in the schoolyard, and start out with philosophizing with geocaching. This is actually also locating a space somewhere and locating a stone somewhere with a question on it, not just by bringing a smile on the face of the kids, but by asking them an intriguing, well-coined philosophical question. So this can be a low-tech alternative, I think, if you do want to make use of outdoor learning and do want to get your kids thinking, but you're not that much engaged in the high-tech world of using apps and telephones and things like that. Yes, Carmen.
Well, I was thinking maybe this is a good way to approach outdoor learning, where you start with these smaller little activities outside so that the students can get used to it, you can get used to it. And once you have achieved this rhythm and pattern and, and you basically, well, trust your students enough that they know how to work outside, then you go on to the next step, which could be geocaching and the bigger things.
Yeah, gradual build up. Yeah, I approached it reversely, so I threw you in at the deep end basically, and this is the last thing that I want to show you about learning through doing actually and being outside. But that could be a very good idea to start low tech and to experiment with it to see whether it works, and then you can always scale it up. Okay, I'm gonna leave you with this. Also, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, stop recording as well.